I, a 54-year-old male, got divorced from my wife, a 48-year-old female, 8 years ago. My daughter, who is now 28, cut all contact with me and sided with her mother without even asking how I felt. Even though my divorce happened nearly a decade ago, it took me a long time to come to terms with it and find peace with my life. This was partly because my ex-wife tried to ruin my reputation, but mostly because being completely shut out from my daughter's life was harder than anything. Since she was an adult at the time, there was no way for me to be part of her life unless she wanted me to be, and she seemed firm in her decision to side with her mother. I don't have much family, except for my mom who had Alzheimer's, so the whole ordeal was one of the worst things that ever happened to me. I tried to contact my daughter several times after the divorce, but she was adamant about being on her mom's side and didn't even try to hear my side of the story. At one point, my ex-wife sued me for harassment if I didn't leave my daughter alone. That spelled things out for me, and I stopped contacting her. I spent the last 8 years taking care of my mom and focusing on my career. I've had a few casual relationships here and there, but I feel like I can't really trust another person after my divorce. Anyway, that has been my life for nearly a decade. Sorry if I seem like a downer. The reason I'm writing this post is because my daughter recently reached out to me after all this time. I was over the moon and thought that she had finally come to her senses and understood that the divorce was not just my fault. It was also comforting, especially because my mother recently passed away, and I've been dealing with that grief by myself, craving some comfort and family. So, my daughter reached out to me a few months after my mother passed away. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and I picked up to hear a woman's voice on the other side. I didn't know it was my daughter and didn't even recognize her voice because it had been so long since we spoke. I was quite shocked when she introduced herself. She said that she saw on Facebook that her grandma passed away and wanted to check up on me. I was taken aback. I didn't even know that she kept tabs on me online and thought that was sweet of her. I thanked her for calling and said that I was doing all right and told her that I missed her. We talked for a bit and she said that if I wanted to meet and actually catch up in person instead of on the phone, she would like that. I was extremely happy and agreed immediately. We set up a meeting at my house over the weekend. I am really excited about meeting her after all these years. So I am writing this post to share my excitement with anyone who might be reading. I hope we can rebuild our relationship or at least get to know each other again. My daughter came over to have dinner with me because I wanted to cook for her. I was both nervous and excited when I opened the door. It had been nearly a decade since I last saw her, and she was just a little girl back then. I hardly recognized her. We started talking, and although it was a bit awkward at first, we gradually opened up to each other. She told me about her life and what she does for work, and I shared my experiences from the past years. After dinner, we finally addressed the elephant in the room. I asked her why she never bothered to listen to my side of the story during the divorce and chose her mom by default. I admitted that her mother was more present as a parent because she was a stay-at-home mom, while I worked long hours in construction. Still, I always tried to spend as much time with her as I could. My daughter then expressed regret over how things turned out, saying she was too young to think things through and had been manipulated by her mom. Her mother had painted me as the ultimate bad guy who didn't care about anyone except himself. Since my daughter never heard my side of the story, she never questioned her mom's narrative. We talked more about this, and it seemed like things were going well until she revealed the real reason she was there. We had been talking for hours when I asked what made her reach out to me after all these years. She looked a bit uncomfortable, so I told her to be honest with me. She then admitted that she had been keeping tabs on me through Facebook. When she found out her grandmother had died, she expected lawyers to contact her about her inheritance. When no one did, she decided to reach out to me personally. She explained that she wanted to give me time to grieve, but had recently gotten engaged and could really use some money for her wedding expenses. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I thought my prayers had been answered and that I could have a family again. But it turned out she never cared for me in the first place. She only wanted her inheritance. The saddest part is that it's not even her inheritance legally. It's mine. If she hadn't been such a terrible daughter to me, she would have ended up with most, if not all, of it. I don't care about money, I never have. I live in my own house, don't have expensive hobbies, and buy most of my clothes from Target. Even if the inheritance wasn't in question, I wouldn't have minded helping out with her wedding at all. In conclusion, this revelation was heartbreaking. I thought we were reconnecting out of genuine interest and affection, but it was all about money. Despite everything, I still hope for a chance to mend our relationship, but this incident has made me cautious and wary. If she had reached out nicely, instead of trying to take advantage of me and only caring about the inheritance, things might have been different. All of this was racing through my mind. But I somehow maintained my composure and asked her if that was all she wanted. She became very defensive, claiming that the inheritance was secondary and her real goal was to reconnect with me. She insisted she would never forgive herself for not reaching out while her grandmother was alive. She said she had wanted to contact me for years, but never had the courage, fearing I would never forgive her for siding with her mother without an explanation. She mentioned feeling manipulated by her mom, but the panicked look on her face made me wonder if she was just trying to smooth things over to get the money. I asked her how she knew about the inheritance, and she explained that a couple of years before the divorce, while visiting my late mother, she was told that she would inherit everything left by my father, who had passed away years ago, being the only grandchild in the family. And with my marriage, seemingly stable at the time, I understood why my mother might have said that. If the divorce had never happened, or if my daughter hadn't abandoned me for years, the money would have been hers, as I had already mentioned. But the thought that she only cared about the money, giving me false hopes, was absolutely crushing. I was devastated, but did my best not to show it. At that moment, I thought the only way to test my daughter's intentions was to see her reaction if I told her there was no money to inherit. I asked her how much she expected from the inheritance, and she made a pretty accurate guess, indicating that some planning had gone into this. I then told her that I was sorry to disappoint her, but her grandmother had left everything to me years ago, and I planned to use that money to start a business, so I couldn't help her out. I offered to contribute a few $1,000s for her wedding expenses from my own savings. The disappointment on her face confirmed my worst fears. She said she appreciated my offer, but insisted that as the only grandchild, she deserved at least some of the inheritance because it was her grandma's money promised to her. I reiterated that I wished I could help her more, but that my decision was final, and there was nothing more I could do if she wasn't happy with what I was offering. She turned completely red with anger and insisted again that I reconsider my decision. When I firmly repeated my stance, she showed her true colors, saying something that confirmed all my doubts about her real intentions. She told me that I was exactly the selfish a whole her mother had always said I was, and she was glad I was alone in life. I looked at her with barely concealed disgust. Her words were deeply hurtful, but by that point I knew what to expect. I just hadn't expected her to be so brutally honest so quickly. As she began to say something else, I stopped her before she could continue. I told her that I should have known she was her mother's daughter, and that the only reason she would reach out to anyone was to ask for a favor. I also told her that using my grief over my mother to try and manipulate me was disgusting, even for a person like her. She tried to respond, but I just laughed in her face and said that if she hadn't blocked me all those years ago, she would have gotten my texts about her grandmother and probably received most, if not all, of the inheritance. That sentence had the desired effect. She looked utterly baffled and asked me what I meant. I told her to unblock me on her old number so I could resend all the texts that never got delivered. She did. And I forwarded all the messages where I begged her to hear me out and informed her that her grandmother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and that I wanted them to meet before she forgot about her only grandchild completely. This was true. At the beginning of her illness, my mom often mentioned my daughter and asked to see her. I remember how it broke my heart not to be able to fulfill that wish. Now, this ungrateful, cruel child had the audacity to ask for an inheritance. To my daughter's credit, she did look ashamed after reading those messages. She apologized, but then argued that it was clear her grandma would have wanted her to have a share of the inheritance, and it wasn't fair for me to punish her like this. She said she was young and didn't know any better during the divorce, or else she would have handled things differently. She also claimed she genuinely wanted to rebuild our relationship, but if I chose to be selfish now, she wouldn't feel comfortable continuing our relationship. I told her that if money is what makes or breaks our relationship, then maybe it's better if we don't have one at all. I wanted to believe her when she said she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I truly did. But at that point, I couldn't. I told her that I would consider giving our relationship another chance. But the inheritance was out of the question. She looked at me with pure hatred and left my house. I didn't try to stop her at all. Since then, I've spoken to a few of my friends. Most of them agree that I did the right thing. But one of my closest friends suggested that since I don't really care about the money, I should just let my daughter have at least some of it if it meant having family in my life. I don't agree with this, but ever since he said it, I can't get it out of my head. Should I give my daughter part of my inheritance? Update 1. Hi there. This post got a lot more responses than I thought it would. Thanks for your advice and opinions. They gave me the perspective I needed. I guess I'll start by answering the most common question. What happened during the divorce? I haven't spoken about it for years, but I guess it can't hurt anymore. My wife and I were married for 23 years, and you'd think after all those years she wouldn't be able to stab me in the back, but she did. I really don't want to get into the details, but I found out that she was cheating on me with multiple men. Apparently, it had been going on for years before I finally discovered it. When I found out, I was completely devastated. I didn't know how to confront her, so I started drinking heavily and sleeping around as well. I nearly destroyed my life. We fought a lot, and I guess that, along with the drinking, made it really easy for her to manipulate my daughter into taking her side. After nearly a year of living like that and being separated, we finally confronted each other and got divorced. My ex-wife was a journalist at the time and is kind of a local celebrity. She used her influence to try to destroy my reputation and was nearly successful. After the divorce, it took me a long time to quit drinking and get back to my normal life. As I've said already, my daughter completely abandoning me did not help, to say the least. I'll admit that when I found out about my ex affairs, I kind of went off the rails and wasn't present as a parent for my daughter. Even during the time I was separated and for a year or so after the divorce, I pretty much kept to myself and wasn't there for my daughter. But once I stopped drinking and got my life back together, the first thing I did was to reach out to her and apologize. But she refused to listen to me and blocked me everywhere. I thought giving her time would work and she would eventually come around. But here we are, 8 years later, and our relationship has only gotten worse with time. Now, the other big question about my mom's inheritance. Technically, the money belonged to my father. My grandparents were both doctors and had bought property all around the city during their careers. Most of it was rented out and ended up bringing in a lot of money. Dad passed away when I was 21 and left everything to Mom. All of it remained in her name during my marriage and for a few years after my divorce, while her health was still good. After Mom passed away, I received everything as her sole heir. My ex-wife didn't receive anything in the divorce except alimony until she got remarried a few years ago, because my mom owned everything at the time. So, the way things stand, my daughter never even got close to owning anything. She knew, of course, that her grandma was a landlady and owned a couple of Airbnbs, but I never touched any of that money because the money I made from my old construction business was more than enough to live comfortably. I hope I've answered all your questions. Also, my daughter hasn't reached out to me after that night, and I don't think she will. To be honest, I think she made it pretty clear that she only put up with this whole show for the inheritance, and now that it's out of the question, there's no reason for her to stay in touch. I don't expect to see her around anymore. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't upset about it. But at this point, I know not to expect too much from people, no matter who they are. So, that's that, I guess. Thanks to all of you for sending support. I appreciate it. I also think it's time for me to put myself out there and maybe get back into dating and find companionship instead of expecting ghosts from my past to come around. Update 2, it's been quite a week, guys. I thought my last update would be my final one, but life had other plans. Anyway, I had just gotten back from work and was considering going out with a couple of buddies when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I opened the door, and there she was, my worst nightmare. She had changed her hair and lost some weight, so it took me a couple of seconds to recognize her, but it's hard to forget someone you were together with for decades. Seeing her was quite a shock, to say the least. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there awkwardly. She then asked if I had a moment to talk about some things. I was hesitant, but didn't want her standing at my door, so I invited her in. It was really awkward, as you can probably imagine. We made small talk about this and that, and then she said that she understood this was a little strange, but there were some things she needed to tell me. I asked her to go on, and she said that our daughter reached out to her and told her about the inheritance. I kind of saw that coming. Why else would she need to speak to me after all these years? Anyway, she said that she understood the divorce was really hard on me and that she took things further than she probably should have. I just scoffed at that, but she ignored my reaction. She then said that I shouldn't punish our daughter for what happened between the two of us. She repeated some of the same things my daughter had said, such as her being very young at the time of the divorce, and how I can't be resentful towards her for choosing her mother over me. I stopped her at that point and said that I have no resentment towards anyone anymore, and that even if I held on to any anger, it wouldn't be towards our daughter. I told her I was hurt at the realization that after all those years, our daughter only thought of reaching out to her father because there was a possibility of getting some money out of it. I reiterated what I had told my daughter, that if she had the decency to try and reconnect earlier, she would have ended up with the inheritance. My ex tried to put up some sort of defense, but I told her that my decision was final and that if they were just going to go around in circles about this one thing, they were wasting everyone's time. I told her that I had plans and that if there was nothing else to discuss, she should probably leave. She nodded and apologized for bothering me, and I told her there was no need for that. Then she left. After she was gone, I just sat there in disbelief. I never expected to see her again, let alone have a conversation in my home. It was strange and brought up a lot of old memories that I would rather not have thought about again. I went out with my friends and tried to forget all about it. So, yeah, that happened, and I needed to get it off my chest. Thanks for reading along if you're still here. Update 3. I have another update for you guys. This afternoon, while I was at work, I got a call from my daughter. I thought about not picking up, but curiosity got the best of me. I answered and immediately told her that if this was about the inheritance, there was no point in having a conversation. She said there was something else she wanted to discuss. I asked her to go on, and she said she had been thinking a lot about what happened and felt she owed me an apology. She admitted she should have handled things differently and that if I was willing to forgive her and give our relationship another chance, she would be happy to have me at her wedding. I was really taken aback, to say the least. I asked her if she was sure about it, and she confirmed. She told me to take some time to think about it and let her know if I'd be there or not. I said all right, and we hung up. I'm really confused now. A part of me is overjoyed at the thought of being at her wedding, but I also can't shake the feeling that this is just a way for her to get on my good side and eventually claim the inheritance. At the same time, if she's genuinely reaching out, I don't want to sabotage my chance at being in her life. If I say no and she never reaches out again, I could hardly blame her. I'd appreciate some advice if anyone would like to help me out. Update 4. I've decided to go to the wedding. Many of you said that attending couldn't do any harm, and I guess that makes sense. It's not like I have to do anything in return for being invited. Also, no, I'm not at the wedding party, I'd just be a guest. I'm fine with that, as I understand that going from someone she hasn't spoken to in 8 years to someone walking her down the aisle is a big leap. I don't think either of us would be comfortable with that. I really do hope this is the start of a new chapter, and that we can build something meaningful out of this. Thanks to all of you for listening and for all the advice you've given. I appreciate it and hope you guys wish me luck.